After the betrayal, Clara stood in her father's study, looking out over the estate. What had she become? She had worked tirelessly to regain what had been stolen from her, but now she felt the weight of the power she had acquired. She was no longer just the maid who cleaned the mansion. She was its owner, the head of a multi-billion-dollar empire. But the more she looked at her success, the more she began to question if it had all been worth it. The price of power had been higher than she had anticipated. She had alienated family, lost friends, and sacrificed her own peace of mind. Clara began to wonder if it was all just a cycle of revenge, a way to prove that she could overcome the people who had wronged her. But now, as she stood at the top, Clara realized that true success wasn't just about getting revenge. It was about building something meaningful, a legacy that would outlast her. But as she faced the empire she had built, Clara knew that the real work was just beginning. Would she remain on this path of power and control, or would she shift toward something more authentic? Clara's journey of revenge and reclamation had come full circle. She had taken the mansion back, claimed her inheritance, and built her empire from the ground up. But now, she was faced with a new challenge: letting go. The mansion, once a symbol of her pain, had now become a symbol of strength. But as Clara stood in front of the grand windows, watching the sun set over the estate, she realized something. The mansion didn't define her. It was time to let it go. The Hadleys had wanted to control everything, to hold on to their power at all costs. But Clara had learned that true freedom came from letting go of the past, from not being defined by what had happened or what she had gained. Clara made the decision to sell the mansion. It wasn't just about the money. It was about freeing herself from the chains of the past. She had already built her legacy, and it was time to move forward. The mansion was no longer a symbol of her inheritance. It was time for Clara to create her future, unburdened by the weight of everything that had happened. The decision to sell the mansion was just the first step. As Clara let go of the physical symbol of her past, she also had to forgive herself and the people who had betrayed her. Forgiveness wasn't easy. It wasn't just about the Hadleys or Jenna. It was about releasing the anger and resentment that had driven her for so long. Clara had spent so many years fighting for what was rightfully hers. But now, she realized that the real battle had been with her own emotions. Could she forgive herself for the mistakes she had made along the way? Could she forgive the people who had wronged her and move forward with a clear heart? The journey toward forgiveness wasn't easy, but Clara knew it was the only way to move forward. True power, she realized, wasn't about revenge. It was about healing and peace. She had already taken everything from the Hadleys, but in the end, the greatest victory would be her ability to forgive and build something better. Now that Clara had let go of the past, she focused on rebuilding her empire with purpose. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about making a real difference. Clara used the wealth from the mansion's sale to fund community projects that supported education, healthcare, and small businesses. She was creating an empire that would give back, not just take. Clara's vision was clear. She wasn't interested in expanding for the sake of power. She wanted to create something that would leave a positive legacy, an empire that would uplift people and change lives. As Clara worked with her team to implement these initiatives, she realized that this was the legacy she had always wanted to leave behind. The Hadleys had built their empire on greed and deceit, but Clara's empire would stand for justice, integrity, and compassion. Clara had won. She had taken back everything the Hadleys had stolen from her, and she had rebuilt her family's legacy from the ground up. But the true victory wasn't in the wealth or the mansion. It was in her own transformation. Clara had faced betrayal, doubts, and the betrayal of those she loved, but she had come out stronger on the other side. Her legacy would be defined not by revenge or power, but by the change she created. Clara stood at the helm of a company that would make a difference, an empire that would last. The battle was over, but the journey had just begun. Clara's rise from maid to mogul was not just a victory for her. It was a victory for anyone who had ever been undervalued or undermined. Her empire wasn't just hers. It was for the people. Clara stood at the gates of the Blackwell estate, her blazer clinging under the summer heat. It wasn't the sun making her sweat. It was the ghosts that lived in those gilded halls. Every marble tile she had once scrubbed, every insult she had swallowed, came rushing back like a cruel chorus. "Careful, Clara," she muttered sarcastically under her breath. "Don't trip over the gold-plated door you once weren't allowed to touch." Flanked by Marissa, her sharp-tongued lawyer, she stepped inside. The chandeliers sparkled, but Clara knew glitter often disguised grime. The Blackwells strutted about with champagne flutes, but she noticed the cracks, shadows in their eyes, a stiffness in their smiles. In the study, tucked away behind leather-bound books, Clara discovered property ledgers that didn't add up, mortgages masked as assets, loans dressed as legacies. Her stomach twisted, but she forced a smirk. They hadn't just sold her scrubbing rags. They had pawned their pride and called it inheritance. Owning the mansion wasn't revenge enough. She was holding the receipts of their decay. For the first time in her life, Clara realized the truth. The Blackwells weren't untouchable. They were rotten, and she had the keys to their cellar of shame. The kitchen smelled of garlic and simmering rosemary. But Clara tasted only the bitter memory of humiliation. Years ago, she cried here while dicing onions until her eyes swelled. Now she strolled past the counters in tailored heels, every click announcing, "I don't scrub here anymore. I sign paychecks." Yet whispers lingered. New staff huddled near the walk-in pantry, whispering like school children. "She was a maid here, right?" one asked. Clara's ears pricked. She turned, sarcasm dripping from her smile. "Yes, and I can still cook better than your chef." The group froze, stammering apologies, but Clara didn't need them. Respect wasn't handed. It was taken. As she sipped burnt staffroom coffee, she listened more than she spoke. That's when she heard it. Rumors of a locked wine cellar, a place where no maid or butler had ever been allowed. Her pulse quickened. Secrets don't stay hidden forever, she thought. If the Blackwells locked their best vintages away, what else had they buried? The same walls that once held her down now whispered clues. She didn't just want payback anymore. She wanted bloodlines exposed, scandals stripped bare, lies served hot on silver platters. And this time, she wasn't carrying the trays. The invitation was gilded, embossed in gold letters that smelled of arrogance. Blackwell family dinner. Attendance mandatory. Clara nearly laughed herself hoarse. Once upon a time, she would have sneaked leftover bread rolls when no one was looking. Tonight, she'd sit opposite Eleanor Blackwell, pearls around her neck bought with Eleanor's debt. The dining hall glittered with crystal chandeliers, the table set for war disguised as civility. Eleanor carved into roast beef with the precision of a surgeon. "Some people," she said with venom, "never know their place." Forks froze. Clara raised her glass, hazel eyes burning with irony. "Oh, I do. It's sitting where the contracts are signed." The words sliced through the silence like a serrated knife. Knives clattered, gasps erupted. Thomas Blackwell choked on his wine, while cousins gawked as though the maid had just crowned herself queen. What they didn't know? Clara had evidence tucked neatly in her clutch, property ledgers revealing their empire's fragility. She wasn't here to argue over dinner rolls. She was here to dine on their downfall. Every bite of beef tasted like irony. For the first time in years, Clara wasn't swallowing insults. She was feeding them back, seasoned with sarcasm and garnished with proof. The study smelled of cigar smoke and power, 2 scents Clara used to scrub out of the carpet. Now she was here not to clean but to uncover. She rifled through oak drawers until her fingers brushed files stamped confidential. Her breath caught, receipts tied to shell companies, fraudulent deeds hidden beneath faux legacies. She snapped photos, adrenaline spiking, when a voice sliced the silence. "Clara? What are you doing?" It was Thomas, the youngest son. The boy who once smiled at her by the service door, who whispered promises of escape, and then left her behind. His face was carved in guilt. "Looking for the truth," Clara whispered, sarcasm sharpening her words like glass. He reached for her wrist, but his trembling fingers betrayed him. "Don't. You don't know what you're stirring." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm stirring," Clara hissed, jerking free. "The soup of lies your family's been feeding everyone." The old ache of betrayal returned, heavier than any mop bucket she'd ever carried. Thomas wasn't her savior. He was their accomplice, and now she had proof he'd known all along. Betrayal, Clara realized, was a family recipe perfected in the Blackwell kitchen. Whiskey glistened in crystal glasses as Thomas poured with shaky hands. Midnight painted his face in shadows, making him look less like a golden heir and more like a guilty man. "Clara," he began, voice trembling, "they lied to me too. I thought we were secure. But the vineyards? Mortgaged? The stocks? Inflated? My mother's been covering it up for years." Clara laughed bitterly, the sound colder than the ice in her glass. "And yet you still let them call me dirt while you sipped champagne." His shoulders slumped. "I was a coward." She leaned forward, freckles sharp under lamplight. "Cowards make poor allies, Thomas. Prove you're not one." His hands shook as he slid a folder across the desk. Inside were letters, hidden partnerships, even signatures linking Eleanor to illegal deals. Clara's heart raced. She had thought she'd uncovered rot. This was a corpse garden. She met his eyes, no softness left. "You're not helping me out of guilt. You're trying to save yourself." Thomas lowered his gaze. "Maybe, but at least now you know." For Clara, betrayal burned. But leverage? Leverage healed faster than whiskey. The morning sun gilded the roses. But Clara knew beauty here always concealed thorns. She strolled through Eleanor's meticulously pruned gardens during the charity brunch, every click of her heels echoing among pearl necklaces and forced laughter. Guests eyed her like she was an exotic animal, half curiosity, half disdain. "Isn't that the maid who bought the mansion?" one whispered behind a fan. Clara turned, smile razor sharp. "Yes, and I still know where the silverware hides when it goes missing." Nervous chuckles rippled. She let them gossip, let them underestimate, because amid the perfume and small talk, Clara picked up on something juicier. A senator's wife mentioned offshore accounts in hushed tones. Another guest fretted over a missing sapphire necklace once insured for millions. Clara sipped her mimosa, feigning disinterest, but her mind worked faster than Wall Street traders. She wasn't here to enjoy brunch. She was harvesting scandal like roses, thorns, and all. The same garden that once made her feel small now bloomed with secrets, and Clara had no intention of leaving them buried in soil. If the Blackwells wanted to plant lies, she'd be the storm that uprooted them. Clara admired her reflection in the ballroom mirror, adjusting her blazer when Eleanor appeared behind her like a ghost in diamonds. "Enjoying your little game, Maid?" she hissed, her voice laced with venom. Clara didn't flinch. "Game! Eleanor, this is a takeover!" The matriarch's eyes glinted like daggers. "This mansion will chew you up. It always does." Clara tilted her head, sarcasm dripping from her lips. "Funny, it already spit you out." Gasps fluttered around them, guests pretending not to eavesdrop but drinking every word. Eleanor's face flushed crimson, pearls trembling at her throat. "You don't belong here," she spat. Clara's smirk hardened into steel. "I belong wherever I choose to pay the bills, and sweetheart, I pay all of them now." For the first time, Eleanor blinked. The queen of icy poise cracked. The woman who ruled the house with an iron teapot was now just another fallen monarch, rattled by the maid who refused to stay in her place. Clara walked away, heels echoing, leaving Eleanor trembling in her own ballroom. Power had shifted, and everyone watching knew it. That night, Clara slipped into the old servants' quarters. The cramped room smelled of boiled potatoes and detergent, memories suffocating her. She sat on the iron bed, running a hand over the chipped paint, when a knock came. Lillian, the mansion's longtime cook, stepped in, eyes brimming with warmth. The African-American woman had once slipped Clara crusts of bread when she worked late nights. "I always knew you'd rise, baby," Lillian whispered, pressing a trembling hand to Clara's cheek. "They feared your grit." Clara's throat tightened. "And you kept feeding me when they starved me." Lillian handed her a faded envelope, edges frayed with time. Inside were letters Eleanor had ordered destroyed, proof of bribes, hush money, even stolen heirlooms. "You don't throw away truth, child. You keep it until someone's strong enough to use it." Clara's eyes stung, but her smirk returned. "Guess it's my turn to set the table." For the first time since entering the mansion, she didn't feel alone. Lillian wasn't just an ally. She was a reminder that Clara's fight wasn't only for herself, it was for everyone who had ever been silenced in those gilded walls. Guided by Lillian's directions, Clara descended into the wine cellar, the air damp and heavy with secrets. Her flashlight cut through dust and cobwebs until it landed on a rack of vintage bottles. Behind it, a false wall. She shoved until the panel creaked open. Crates stacked high filled the hidden chamber. Ledgers, jewelry, boxes marked with false business names. Her heart pounded. This was no cellar. It was a vault of lies. As she flipped open a ledger, her breath caught. Transactions tied to politicians, hush payments to celebrities, even a slush fund for campaign donations. The Blackwells weren't just rich. They were criminally entangled. Footsteps echoed. Thomas stood at the doorway, pale and rigid. "I told you not to come here," he whispered. Clara smirked, sapphire necklace dangling from her fingers. "What, scared I'll find the family jewels don't shine as bright as advertised?" He swallowed hard, unable to deny it. For Clara, the discovery wasn't just about proving corruption. It was confirmation. The Blackwells' empire was built on counterfeit loyalty and buried secrets. And now she held the matches to burn it down. Amid the crates lay the infamous sapphire necklace, Eleanor's pride, once paraded at galas. But this one bore fresh insurance tags marked "claimed lost." Clara's laugh bounced off stone walls. "Insurance fraud? How original." She dangled the necklace like bait, its sapphire glinting in flashlight beams. "Guess your fortune really is costume jewelry," she quipped. Thomas lunged, panic cracking his perfect mask. "Don't, Clara! If this gets out, it'll destroy us!" She raised a brow, eyes hard. "Us? You destroyed yourselves the moment you thought scrubbing toilets made me invisible." Her sarcasm sliced deeper than any blade, but underneath it was resolve. This necklace wasn't just proof of fraud, it was a weapon. With it, she could unravel Eleanor's entire financial fortress. Thomas sagged against the wall, defeated. Clara turned, necklace clenched in her fist, and whispered to herself, "The maid they mocked is about to choke them with their own pearls." The cellar reeked of mildew and secrets, but Clara's steps were light. She wasn't just uncovering fraud. She was unearthing the nails for the Blackwells' coffin. By dawn, the Blackwell estate had become a zoo. Reporters camped at the gates, camera flashes bursting like fireworks. Headlines screamed, "Heiress fraud allegations, Blackwell dynasty in crisis." Clara sipped her coffee from a china cup, watching from the second-floor balcony with a smirk. "Imagine," she said to Lillian beside her, "they mocked me for polishing silver, and now I'm polishing their reputations off the front page." Eleanor stormed into the room, pearls rattling on her collarbone. "You did this!" she shrieked. Clara raised her brows innocently. "Funny, I thought I couldn't even spell, let alone leak documents to the press." Her sarcasm cut deep, and Eleanor's fury nearly split the air. The truth? Clara hadn't called the press. But someone, Thomas, or maybe another nervous cousin, had leaked the cellar files. And now the scandal had grown legs, running wild across every news channel in America. Clara didn't need to destroy them herself. The world was doing it for her. All she had to do was keep smiling, sipping her coffee while the house of cards collapsed. The maid who once begged for scraps was now the face of the Blackwell's ruin. Inside the mansion, chaos reigned. Phones rang off the hook, lawyers shouted, and Eleanor shrieked orders no one followed. Guests who had once flocked to their dinners now fled like rats from a sinking ship. Clara walked calmly through the halls, heels clicking like a metronome. She thought of every insult, every stupid maid, every smirk when she carried trays, and let sarcasm drip from her lips. Strange, she muttered to Marissa. The mansion doesn't feel so big when it's collapsing. But beneath her smirk, Clara's chest felt heavy. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was war, and wars had casualties. Lillian's worried glance reminded her of that. "They'll fight dirtier than you know," the cook warned. Clara paused, staring at the portraits lining the hall, their painted eyes full of smug entitlement. "Good," she whispered. "So will I." For the first time, she realized she wasn't tearing down a family. She was dismantling a machine, a dynasty built on arrogance and theft. And if she wasn't careful, it could swallow her, too. But Clara wasn't the same girl they mocked. She wasn't afraid of being chewed up anymore. In the shadow of the crumbling empire, desperation bloomed. A Blackwell cousin cornered Clara in the solarium, sweat glistening at his temple. "Name your price," he whispered. "Walk away and we'll cut you in." Clara tilted her head, smirk curling. "Cut me in? Darling, I own the house you're begging in. You're a guest at my table." His jaw tightened, but panic flickered in his eyes. Clara saw it instantly. Weakness. The family wasn't united. They were splintering, each scrambling to protect themselves. Divide and conquer, she thought. Let them turn on each other while she stood unscathed. "You don't know what you're inviting," he hissed, voice trembling. Clara leaned in, sarcasm honey-sweet. "On the contrary, I invited myself the moment Eleanor forgot how to pay her bills." As he stormed off, Clara's smirk faded. Deals like that reeked of desperation and traps. But it didn't matter. She had no interest in bribes. She wasn't here to settle quietly. She was here to air their dirty laundry in public, bleach and all. The maid wasn't bargaining anymore. She was rewriting the rules, and every cousin with a trembling voice was just another pawn in her game. The Queen of Pearls and Poison had cracked. Staff whispered that Eleanor hadn't left her suite for days. Clara decided to see for herself. She found Eleanor slumped among shattered perfume bottles, mascara streaked down her face. The woman who once demanded respect with a raised eyebrow now looked like a wilted rose in silk. "You think you've won?" Eleanor spat, voice raw. Clara crouched, sarcasm dripping like venom. "Won? Eleanor? I haven't even played my best cards." The matriarch's hand shook as she reached for a glass of whiskey, missing it entirely. The sight tugged something in Clara's chest. Pity, maybe, but she shoved it down. This was the same woman who once called her kitchen filth. Eleanor lunged suddenly, but Clara stood tall, unflinching. For years, Eleanor had held power with jewels and cruelty. Now she was reduced to a trembling widow surrounded by her own lies. Clara didn't need to scream victory. Her presence was victory enough. As she walked out, the staff's whispers followed. The maid had conquered the queen. And Clara, though shaken, realized power didn't always look like pearls. Sometimes it looked like surviving long enough to watch the mighty fall. The library was dim, filled with the scent of leather and dust. Thomas waited there, eyes red from sleepless nights. "Please, Clara," he begged. "Don't ruin us all. We can fix this together." Clara froze, chest tightening. Once, She'd dreamed of running away with him, away from marble floors and cruel laughter. Now he looked less like a prince and more like a man undone. "Together?" she repeated, sarcasm sharp. "You mean like when you let your mother call me dirt and said nothing?" His shoulders sagged. I was weak, I was wrong. For a moment, the ache returned. Her heart remembered the boy who once smiled at her in shadows, but her mind snapped her back. "Thomas," she said softly, "your family wrote this ending. I'm just reading it aloud." He dropped his gaze, defeated. The silence between them was heavier than betrayal. It was finality. As Clara turned away, she realized Thomas's plea wasn't love. It was survival. He didn't want her heart. He wanted her silence. And silence was the one thing she refused to give ever again. At the Blackwell's downtown corporate office, Clara strode into the boardroom like she'd been born to sit at the head. Executives whispered behind manicured hands as she laid a stack of files onto the gleaming table. "Fraudulent transfers, forged accounts, stolen investments," she listed calmly, her voice slicing through the air. Eleanor tried to interrupt, pearls rattling as she hissed. "You know nothing." Clara cut her off with a laugh sharp enough to draw blood. "I may have scrubbed your toilets, Eleanor, but at least I didn't launder your stocks." Gasps rippled around the room. The board members shifted uncomfortably, some clearly siding with Clara, others eyeing the exits like rats. Clara didn't need applause. She had something sharper, proof, and proof, she knew, was louder than power. For the first time, the empire wasn't trembling at Eleanor's command. It was trembling at Clara's evidence. She leaned back, freckles glowing under fluorescent lights. The maid they mocked wasn't just dismantling their mansion, she was dismantling their empire. And the boardroom, once Eleanor's throne, had just become Clara's stage. The downfall wasn't Clara's voice alone, it was a chorus. Former staff began speaking up, their stories pouring into reporters' microphones. A driver revealed stolen wages. A maid shared harassment tales. Even gardeners confessed to years of mistreatment. Clara stood among them, freckles catching camera flashes, voice steady. "They thought silence was golden," she said, sarcasm dripping. "Turns out it's expensive when everyone starts talking." Eleanor tried to dismiss them as liars, but the testimonies piled up. One person could be silenced. Dozens could not. Lillian stood beside Clara, tears glistening as she recounted her years in the kitchen. For once, the public saw not servants, but survivors. Clara wasn't just their leader, she was their amplifier. And as more staff joined the chorus, the Blackwell's empire crumbled, not because Clara shouted the loudest, but because she gave others the courage to speak. Betrayal had spread through the family like a virus, but loyalty bloomed among the silenced. The maid they mocked had become the voice they could not drown, and her army? It was everyone they'd underestimated. News broke that the Blackwells were forced to auction off properties to cover debts. Clara didn't just attend, she made sure she sat in the front row. Her pearls glittered under the auction house chandeliers as Eleanor's prized vineyard estate went under the hammer. The auctioneer's gavel hovered. Clara raised her paddle, calm and deliberate. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Poetic, isn't it?" she whispered to Marissa. When the gavel struck, Clara smiled faintly. The land Eleanor once banned her from stepping foot on was now hers. Across the room, Eleanor's face crumpled, mascara streaking. Clara didn't clap. She didn't gloat. She simply sipped champagne, her silence heavier than applause. Because sometimes revenge wasn't about shouting victory. Sometimes it was about being seen, sitting where you were never meant to sit, owning what you were never meant to own. And in that silence, Clara realized she hadn't just beaten Eleanor. She'd rewritten her story. Desperation makes fools of even the proudest. Eleanor's final trick was a forged will, claiming the mansion should revert to true heirs. Clara intercepted it before it reached the courts, the ink still fresh. She stormed into Eleanor's suite, waving the paper like a banner. "Really? After all that, you forge a will? At least make it believable. Eleanor's hands shook. The woman who once snapped her fingers and bent worlds now trembled like a cornered thief. "This isn't over," she hissed weakly. Clara smirked, tearing the will in half, then in quarters. She let the pieces flutter to the carpet like confetti. "It's over when I say it is." The sound of the tearing paper echoed louder than any courtroom verdict. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, not from grief, but from knowing she'd lost the last card in her deck. For Clara, the moment wasn't about cruelty. It was about closure. The forgery was pathetic, a symbol of how far Eleanor had fallen. And Clara, she wasn't just the maid anymore. She was at the end of Eleanor's dynasty. Alone in the grand hall, Clara gazed at the chandelier she once polished until her arms ached. The marble beneath her feet still gleamed, but this time it reflected her power, not her labor. "They mocked the maid," she whispered, sarcasm melting into steel. "Now the maid owns their world." Her heels echoed across the silent room. For years she had swallowed insults, bit her tongue until it bled. Tonight, the silence was hers. And yet victory wasn't sweet, it was heavy, like carrying scars inside a velvet dress. She thought of Thomas's pleas, Eleanor's breakdown, the cousin's desperation. She had broken them, yes, but in breaking them, she had shattered pieces of herself too. Still, Clara stood tall. Her reflection in the chandelier wasn't the timid maid anymore. It was the woman who refused invisibility. The war with the Blackwells wasn't just revenge, it was survival, and survival meant rewriting history with her name etched in bold letters. Clara Remington was no longer a servant in their story. She was the author. Thank you for watching. I will be glad to see you in the next episode.